We're here at the Poliglot Gathering in Poland this year, 2022, and we're going to have a conversation. What is the topic, Lucas?
Yeah, we're going to discuss whether there are languages that are harder than other languages.
Okay, let's start with you, Gabriel. Do you think there are languages that are harder or easier than others?
I don't have a straight answer for that, especially because there's so many things to consider. But we were just talking with Lucas. First of all, you have to forget about closeness of languages. I mean, the closer the language you learn is to the languages that you speak, the easier it is, of course. So forgetting about that, the question is, what makes a language difficult and complex to learn? And one of the most important things is, of course, grammar. So are there languages like Hungarian that have complex grammar that are they more difficult to learn than languages like English that have easy grammar, as you call it? And I was speaking to David Peterson, who created the languages for Game of Thrones, Dothraki, and for The Witcher and other languages. And his argument was that there are no difficult or complex languages, because if you want to express a complex or difficult thought with Hungarian or languages with difficult grammar, you change the words, and then you have to conjugate, declination, and so on, and you change the words, and then you express that thought. But with English, you can't do that, because in English you don't change the words. So instead, you have to add more and more words to it, and then suddenly a concept, like you're trying to express a thought, you're doing that in Hungarian in 4 words, and in English you need 10 words, and you need to make sure that the word order is the right one, because if that word comes after that, then it means something different, and you have to make sure the tonality is the right one, because depending on which word you highlight, it means something different. So that makes English just as complex as Hungarian, at least when it comes to expressing a complicated thought. So that was his argument, and I was thinking about that, and I think for complex thoughts that's true, but for easy thoughts, in easy thought is easy to express in English, but not easy to express in a language that has complex grammar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you guys agree?
Well, I think that you also have to separate these into separate. How can I put that? Concepts.
Take your time, we have the whole night.
Concepts. For instance, in Polish, if you want to say "I am Brazilian," you need to use the instrumental case, right? And this could be simplified into using the nominative case, like we do in Russian. So, yeah, just this concrete example, I think, makes Polish in this particular regard more complex than objectively more complex than Russian, even for a native speaker of Brazilian Portuguese, which is my case. And I know that you studied Hungarian. Yeah, what do you think?
I would say, recently, maybe not recently, some 5 or 10 years ago, I got to know this concept that according to which all languages are equally complex. This has been highly debated in the course of history, but I believe that it all depends on your perspective, meaning that fortunately or unfortunately, we all speak one native language, so it's always a perspective relative to our own system. But in general, I would say that if you think about it, every language has its complex and less complex points. For example, English is supposed to be an easy language, but I believe it's an illusion. English might be easy for certain things, but for example, for its phonetic system, it's one of the most difficult languages in the world. So if you take a language in isolation, let's say in a vacuum, I think that all languages are equally complex. Then you have Esperanto, for example, but that's an artificial language, so it's a different matter. But I believe that whether a language, I don't like the words, complex is is an appropriate word for languages in isolation, but then when it comes to learning languages that are harder or easier, it all depends on your own system or the languages that you already have under your belt. So you're saying, for example, Hungarian. Hungarian is very different. That's why it's difficult. I don't like the word difficult. I would say that if a language is closer to yours, it takes less time and less effort to learn. But all languages are equally difficult if you don't want to learn them or if you're not motivated to learn. So I think complex is for languages in isolation, and harder or easier. It depends on the distance between your native language and the rest. And I wanted to say one last thing that's interesting, because I like this stuff. We all do, I guess.
I figured.
There's a book which is called Through the Language Glass, that talks about the fact that, for example, 200 years ago, Europeans, especially cocky Europeans, tended to think that the tribes in South America or in Africa, their languages were necessarily very simple because of the simple ways these peoples lived. But it turns out that these languages were extremely complex, polysynthetic or whatever technical term they use. So, complexity is a complex issue to tackle. But we all have to deal with whether a language is closer to yours or not, and whether you want to learn it at the end of the day. That's what counts.
For sure, yeah.
In my case, this is very interesting what you just said right now, is that when I was learning German and Polish, I learned both of them at the same time. And for a Brazilian speaker, it's considered to be easier to learn German, I believe, when you compare it to Polish. It's closer, it's much closer, yeah. The grammar of Polish, they have the cases, they work in a different way. German has cases, but it's different. Anyway, but I had the motivation to learn Polish. It was so easy to find friends when I was on Tandem, on HelloTalk, like applications like that. Talk to people in Polish, they were happy to talk to you. Whereas to find German people on these apps, it was very, very, very hard. Like they usually are very, they want to learn the language that they are learning. They want to speak the language that they are learning. So Spanish, French, Portuguese in my case, I was their partner. So even though I was learning both of them at the same time, literally at the same time, like doing assimil lessons for both of them. Lesson 1 in the same day, lesson 2 in the same day. Later, I learned Polish much, much, much faster because I had the motivation, I have the friends, I had the people, and I was like, it was a pleasure. I want to speak with these people. Like, I woke up, now I'm going to have not a lesson, but like I'm going to have a conversation in Polish today. And with German, I was like, okay, I have to go to the book and try to find people to talk German to.
So what do you think that is? What do you think that? Do you think that Germans are more reserved in general, or maybe you were unlucky with those particular Germans roaming around that app? How does it work?
I think that Germans, they know what they want. That's one thing. And also Germans, they are used to people speaking German because there are many immigrants in Germany, like expats even. Mm-hmm. So they're used to people. It's not something out of the ordinary. Whereas when a foreigner or a Brazilian, an Italian guy speaks Polish, they're like, what the fuck? It's like, I've never seen this in my life. Like right now they're seeing more and more, like in Warsaw, but maybe, 5 years ago when I started learning Polish, that was very weird. And especially if you go outside of Warsaw, the capital, they've never seen a foreigner, like not even a foreigner speaking Polish, a foreigner at all. So yeah.
Like, what are you?
You're talking about the villages now, right?
Yeah, mostly village also, yeah. But even like in Krakow, there are many foreigners, like there are people from the university. But I think that if you pick a random Polish person, maybe 5 years ago in Krakow, the possibility that they never had a conversation with a foreigner was very high.
It's possible. It's possible. I think Poland changed a lot. Has been changing a lot. And I don't recall being in a village in Poland. Maybe, but in general, people are surprised. They go like, "Co? Mówisz po polsku?" And they go like, "What do you speak Polish? Well, why? Like the first question is why? Why would you learn Polish? So it's interesting what you were saying, because I believe that as far as I'm concerned, this is my humble theory and my humble opinion. The complexity of a language, when you talk about the complexity of a language, you're talking specifically about the features of a language. But when you're talking about whether a language is easier or more difficult to learn, you have to factor in so many other things, like, are these native speakers willing to talk to me? Am I going to find native speakers? For example, you guys are learning Armenian, right? And one thing that I was thinking about, I've been learning Serbian for 4 months, and it's difficult to find material to learn Serbian. Serbian because you have Croatian and Serbian,
Yep.
and in Croatian it's way easier to find material. So it's the materials that you can find. Yes, I don't know, for whatever
resources,
reason. The resource is much easier. I had to build my own resources, asking a friend to create resources for me. But it's also, for example, the willingness of people to talk to you, or you finding people. So there's a lot of other factors that you can take into account when it comes to learning a foreign language. Japanese, I had a hard time speaking Japanese because I can't find when I was living in Paris, it was easier to find Japanese. In Rome, they're nowhere to be found, so I have to talk on Skype, but it's a little bit tiring. Anyway.
I remember that when I started learning Norwegian, I mean, Norwegian per se is not a very difficult language, especially if you speak English or for example German as another Germanic language. Yeah, so for instance, when I started learning Norwegian, well, Norwegian per se is not a very difficult language. Especially if you speak English, it's very similar to English, but it's extremely difficult to convince native speakers to talk to you in Norwegian, right? So usually,
to be drunk.
Usually I would start every single conversation like, "Oh, they're so vanskelig å overbevise nordmenn til å snakke norsk med meg," which means it's so difficult to convince Norwegians to talk to me in Norwegian. So they would laugh, and then we would exchange some sentences, but then as soon as I would hesitate, they would switch to English, as opposed to Russian, for example, which is a very difficult language. But they're always happy to speak to you in Russian. So I think that also counts. But at the same time, I would like to go back to what we were discussing a minute ago about Hungarian.
So guys, this is Fabricio, and I'm coming here to say first that I hope that you enjoyed the first part of this video, the one that you just watched, and that we're gonna have more parts, either one more or two more parts. I'm gonna upload them very, very soon, so you gotta stay tuned here on the channel, Language Boost on YouTube. Subscribe here so you don't miss the next parts of this amazing conversation that me and Lucas had with Luca Lampariello and Gabriel Gelman, these two amazing polyglots. So see you soon, guys.